Some people swear they've heard her. Others say it's just a scary story grandmothers tell to keep kids in line. But what if the legend of La Llorona isn't just a fireside tale? What if it's a real cry, a never-ending lament echoing through the night, demanding something that can never be returned? And what if this vengeful spirit doesn't appear by chance, but is tied to a secret buried deep within your own family? Picture this: you're heading home after a long, exhausting day. You decide to take a shortcut to save a few minutes, and suddenly, you find yourself in the middle of a dark, empty park, just you, the rain, and the sound of a woman sobbing through the mist. Sounds like a scene from a movie, right? But that's exactly how it began for an ordinary woman living in Mexico City. What started as simple fatigue turned into sheer terror. And what seemed like coincidence revealed itself to be part of a family tragedy passed down through generations. In this gripping and downright chilling story, you'll dive into tales of horror that blend past and present, blood and regret, motherhood and pain. The Mexican legend of La Llorona takes on a hauntingly personal tone when the secrets of a cursed lineage begin to surface. What once felt like a dark folk tale transforms into a mix of family curses, ancestral forgiveness, and spiritual reunions that defy any rational explanation. Follow each spine-tingling detail of this journey, led by a search for answers and a longing for peace. Among vengeful spirits, reconciliation rituals, and the consequences of betrayal between women in the same bloodline, you'll come to realize that the supernatural might be much closer than you think. Sometimes, it lives inside us, hiding in memories, in inherited silences, in names no one dares to speak aloud. Will La Llorona's cry ever find peace? Or does it still echo through the night, waiting for Somio listen? Mexico City has its own rhythm, loud, alive, relentless. The woman telling this story was just another part of the urban chaos: work, the subway, lines, errands. But that day, drained from head to toe, she did something unusual. She took a shortcut through Parque de los Abadales, a nearly forgotten park swallowed by the expanding city, shrouded in old trees and whispered legends told by the elderly. It was just another path on the map, but that night, the park felt off. The air was thicker, almost like it was hiding something. It was a humid night, the sky weighed down with storm clouds, and a strange hush had settled. Even with distant car horns and sirens in the background, something else was there, something that didn't belong to the city. As she walked faster, a chill slid down her spine, the kind you try to shake off, but it keeps crawling back. Suddenly, everything got quieter, like the world had paused to hold its breath. And that's when she heard it. A woman sobbing. At first, she thought someone was hurt, maybe an elderly woman calling for help. But the sound came from all directions, echoing through the trees like a cry that had no end. It wasn't just any crying. It was weighted, aching, carrying the sorrow of centuries. And right there, among twisted branches and wet leaves, she realized this was no ordinary sob. It was the eternal wail of La Llorona, the vengeful spirit of that ancient Mexican legend. They say, once you hear her, you never forget. She didn't believe in ghosts. But this terror didn't fit inside logic. She tried to reason. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe someone knew the story and decided to act it out. But her instincts screamed louder. And instincts don't lie. She felt watched, followed, almost touched by something unseen. Worse still, there was a deep sadness in the air. A sorrow that wasn't hers but wanted to be. It was as if the park, and the night itself, held a supernatural presence just waiting to be seen. Life in the big city teaches you to brush off the strange. But some things won't let themselves be ignored. That night, she learned that not all shadows come from broken streetlights or towering trees. Some come from within, from memories that aren't even ours. It was only the beginning, But something in her already knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night. The story was about to change. And the cry she heard might have been the calling of a family curse about to rise from the depths. The rain came suddenly. It started as a soft drizzle but quickly turned into a thick curtain, drenching everything in seconds. Fog crawled in low, wrapping around tree trunks like it was trying to erase the path. The woman, already overwhelmed by a growing sense of dread, quickened her pace. But the sound of crying it got louder. Closer. It was no longer a distant echo, it was right behind her. Someone was sobbing with such despair it sliced through the air like a scream. Then, clear as day, she heard it, "Give me back my children." She froze. Her brain tried to make sense of it, tried to rationalize what was happening, but her body had already answered. Her heart raced. Her hands shook. Her feet rooted to the ground. That phrase, "Give me back my children," wasn't just sound. It felt like it was whispered directly into her ear, like this vengeful spirit knew exactly who she was. And that's when she saw her. A figure, completely dressed in white. Soaked veil, arms hanging, long black hair stuck to her face. She didn't walk, she glided. Or rather, didn't seem to touch the ground at all. The woman wanted to run. Scream. Pray. But her body wouldn't move. The spirit moved closer, slowly, her cry relentless. "My children, give them back to me." It felt like being trapped inside a nightmare you couldn't wake up from. This wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't a hallucination. This was La Llorona. Not the folk version, not the tale you hear growing up. This was real. And her eyes fixed, familiar, like she was saying, "I know you." This wasn't just a haunting. It was a meeting. Finally, in a surge of pure instinct, the woman's legs responded. She bolted, no time to look back. She stumbled, slipped, the ghostly cries swirling around her like wind. She didn't stop until she hit the main road, panting, soaked to the bone, but alive. The streetlights seemed unreal, too bright, too calm, like she'd just stepped out of another world. No cars. No people. Just her pounding heart and the terrifying certainty La Llorona is real. And somehow, she was looking for her. Even back home, wrapped in layers of blankets, doors locked, lights on, she couldn't shake the sound. That voice. That cry. That sentence, like a dagger aimed straight at her. Why her? Why that park? That figure hadn't just tried to scare her. She wanted answers. That night, sleep never came. Because the fear wasn't about what she saw, it was about what might come next. The next morning, she felt like a ghost herself. Her body was there, moving through routine, coffee, keys, work, but her mind was still in that park, still hearing that cry. She needed answers. Anything to make sense of what happened. She grabbed her phone and started searching. Weeping Woman Park, Mexico City, ghost crying, and, of course, La Llorona. It didn't take long. Forums, videos, personal accounts, some almost identical to hers. People from all over describing the same figure, the same cry, the same fear. And the scariest part? Many of them had encountered her during moments of personal crisis or life-altering decisions. Between one article and another, she came across a name, Professor Eduardo Morales, a historian who specialized in Mexican folklore and paranormal phenomena. He gave talks, had a YouTube channel, and shared deep dives into legends through a historical and spiritual lens. Desperate to understand what she'd seen, she reached out. To her surprise, he replied that same day and offered to meet in person. When they sat down, she poured everything out, from the park, to the crying woman, to that eerie sense of familiarity she couldn't shake. That's when the professor dropped the first bombshell. What if this wasn't a random encounter? he asked. What if she wasn't warning you in general, but calling to you, specifically? He explained that not all La Llorona sightings were tied to haunted places. Some, he said, were linked to family bloodlines, generations marked by grief, abandonment, or betrayal, especially among women within the same family. Then came the question that chilled her to the core. Do you know of any woman in your family who lost her children tragically? Any history of suicide, jealousy, or maternal abandonment? She was stunned. Nothing like that had ever been mentioned. But families, they're good at hiding their darkest ghosts. She went home with the professor's words ringing in her ears and turned to the only person who might know the truth, her mother. At first, silence. Hesitation. But slowly, things began to surface. Her mom admitted that, yes, there was a painful story. A great-grandmother named Isabel Martinez, who lost 2 of her young children in tragic circumstances. The family always said she never recovered. Consumed by grief, Isabel took her own life, throwing herself into the river near the village they once called home. But no one ever talked about what came next. That night felt heavier than the rest. She tossed and turned, her mind digging through memories like old drawers stuffed with forgotten things. Every half-told family story, every vague childhood whisper, suddenly they all meant more. Her mother, still hesitant, sat down with her and shared what she'd spent her whole life avoiding. Isabel Martinez, her great-grandmother, had lived a life full of pain. A broken marriage. Rejection by her own kin. And worst of all, losing 2 sons under mysterious, unspoken circumstances. The story went that they had drowned in the river one scorching summer afternoon. Isabel never accepted it. Never recovered. She was never the same. But there was something more, something her mother had never dared to say. Something that felt more like legend than fact. Whispered through generations in hushed tones, Isabel had left behind a curse. A bitter warning to all the women in her bloodline. That if they failed to protect their children, or betrayed their family ties, they too would suffer. It sounded cruel, but in light of her despair, maybe it was just a mother's final scream for justice. And that's how the story of Isabel began to blur with the legend of La Llorona. In fact, some said they'd seen her wandering the riverbanks, dressed in white, crying out for the children she'd lost. That realization changed everything. Suddenly, little details from family stories came rushing back: great aunts who lost babies before birth, others who had miscarriages, some who struggled to conceive for years. What once felt like coincidence now felt like a pattern. A cycle. A family curse repeating itself quietly, generation after generation. And the most chilling part? Maybe she was next. She started connecting more dots. Growing up, she'd always sensed a strange distance between the women in her family. Subtle feuds, silent competition, unexplained bitterness. It was always there: jealousy, distrust, betrayal among the women, passed down like an invisible heirloom. What if Isabel, shattered and enraged, had allowed that bitterness to grow into something spiritual? Something that didn't stop when her life did. Maybe the eternal lament she heard in the park wasn't just pine, it was a plea for healing. A desperate call for peace. This part of her journey unraveled everything: her beliefs, her identity, her sense of reality. She realized that fear alone wasn't enough anymore. She had to do something. She needed to find where Isabel had lived, uncover her full story. If La Llorona was truly the echo of Isabel's unresolved grief, maybe, just maybe, there was still time to break the cycle. That's when she heard the name that would change everything: Dona Paula. The only living person who had known Isabel. The only one who might hold the truth that no one else dared to speak. Traveling to Isabel's old village felt like stepping into another era. The roads were unpaved, the houses weathered by time, and the air thick with stories that had never left. It was the kind of place where everyone knew something, but no one dared to speak. At least, not until the narrator mentioned her great-grandmother's full name, Isabel Martinez. That's when an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a voice like worn stone stepped forward. Sitting under the shade of an old tree, she took a slow breath, as if pulling memories from the deepest corners of her soul. "So you're one of hers," she said. Her name was Dona Paula, and over time, she began to speak. Slowly. Carefully. But her words were sharp as knives. Isabel hadn't just been a grieving mother, she was a wounded soul, ripped apart by a deep injustice. Paula revealed a truth that no one in the family had ever told. Isabel's two sons hadn't drowned by accident. They were murdered by a jealous cousin who wanted Isabel's husband. When seduction failed, revenge took over. She dragged the boys into the river and vanished. Isabel discovered the truth too late. The boys were found lifeless in the water, and the cousin disappeared the next day. The village was never the same. Neither was Isabel. She walked through town like a ghost, ignored, mocked, accused of madness. And one day, she snapped. Paula said Isabel stood by the river and cried loud enough for heaven to hear. A curse was spoken that no woman of her bloodline would find peace in motherhood unless the pain was acknowledged and the forgiveness asked, not for the cousin, but for Isabel herself. For ignoring her grief. For calling her crazy. For silencing her scream. "If they didn't hear me alive," she reportedly said, "they'll hear me dead." Since then, locals had sworn they still heard her. Wandering the banks. Dressed in white. Crying for her children. Her cry became a supernatural echo, repeating across generations. A chilling reminder that some wounds don't rest in peace. Paula then guided her up a hill to the village cemetery. Overgrown, quiet, almost forgotten except for one grave covered in moss. A simple headstone read, "Isabel Martinez, mother, woman, shadow." The narrator dropped to her knees like someone bowing before the truth. Her heart ached. It wasn't just a story, Anna Maria, it was her legacy. She hadn't just inherited a name. She'd inherited a sorrow, a burden, a message. Isabel wasn't just her ancestor. She was, perhaps, the very spirit who had whispered in her ear that night in the park. She was La Llorona. That moment unlocked something deep. The narrator knew now that she couldn't turn away. Something had to be done. The curse had to be broken. The crying she heard wasn't just revenge, it was grief asking to be seen. And if Simonianiona had the courage to face it, to really listen, maybe the cycle could end. But this wasn't something to fix with promises or candles. It had to be done at the place where it all began, the river. The one where her children died. The one where Isabel's voice still lingered. The path to the river felt more like a pilgrimage than a walk. Every step was heavy with meaning, each breath a conversation with the past. She arrived at the very spot where Isabel was said to have ended her life. Dark waters, tangled brush, and an eerie silence that seemed to hush even the wind. She had brought offerings, white flowers, a candle, a piece of her grandmother's christening gown, and a letter handwritten from the heart. It wasn't some mystical ritual from a book. This was personal. Raw. A dialogue between blood and spirit. She knelt by the water's edge and lit the candle, shielding its tiny flame with trembling hands. Then she spoke out loud, clearly, like she was calling across time. "Isabel, I see you. I know your pain. And in the name of all of us, I ask for your forgiveness." She said what no one had ever said before, that the silence had been unfair. That the pain was real. That the curse was never evil, only a scream for justice. The trees swayed violently. The wind howled. Nature itself seemed to listen. And then she appeared. From the mist rising over the river, a figure took form. Dressed in white. Long, dripping hair. Her face barely visible, but her eyes, those eyes held centuries of anguish. La Llorona floated above the water. She didn't scream. She simply stared. The narrator stood up slowly, knees shaking, but didn't run. "You were betrayed," she whispered. "But this is no longer just your pain, it's ours. Let me turn this sorrow into something new." The ghost woman stepped closer. She reached out silently and placed her hand on the narrator's shoulder. Then vanished. Like mist meeting morning sunlight. Suddenly, everything changed. The air softened. The wind died. The water looked clearer. A sweet scent, maybe jasmine, filled the air. The letter drifted into the river, carried away like a final message received. The candle blew out on its own, but something inside her remained lit. Something had been accepted. The reconciliation was real. Not magic. Humanity. It was about acknowledging someone else's pain so you could begin to heal your own. When she returned home, something felt lighter. As if a weight had been lifted, not just from her, but from everyone who came before. There was peace now. But not the kind that comes from forgetting. This was the kind that's earned. That's chosen. And in the following days, the proof was clear. No more weeping in the night. No more shadows. No more sobbing in her dreams. La Llorona was no longer crying. Because for the first time in her story, someone had finally listened. The house felt different. Lighter. It wasn't just in her head, even her mother noticed. "Something's changed," she whispered one evening. Together, they started lighting candles at dusk, offering short prayers and soft words to Isabel's memory. It felt like a bridge was being built between past and present, between silence and compassion. What was once a family curse was becoming something else entirely, a story of pain, transformed. One evening, her mother suggested they leave offerings at the local church altar. White flowers. A basket of fruit. An old embroidered handkerchief that once belonged to Isabel. It was a small gesture but a powerful one. "We remember you with love now," they said, "not with fear." From that moment on, there were no more signs. No whispers. No weeping in the wind. No flickers in the hallway. Silence had returned, but this time, it was sacred. It felt final. Then, weeks later, something unexpected happened. She began to feel different. Her body was changing in quiet, curious ways. A strange calmness mixed with fatigue. She bought a test, one of those you pick up not really expecting anything. Positive. She was pregnant. The impact was immediate. Laughter and tears collided in her chest. How? Why now? And yet it felt perfect. It wasn't just a new life, it was a sign. A confirmation. Isabel's presence had not been a warning, but a calling. A call to rebuild. To heal. Now, the very thing once feared, motherhood, became a symbol of strength. Of spiritual peace. Of a curse broken. The bond between generations had been rewritten. Now, she no longer carried the weight of a ghost story, she carried the responsibility to teach her future daughter or son about forgiveness, and listening. About seeing pain. And transforming it. Isabel, who once haunted the night, had become a quiet blessing. A protective force. A silent guardian. As if whispering, "You are free now." That's when she finally understood. The spiritual link between mothers and children goes far beyond life and death. When that bond is broken, the world trembles. But when it's restored, it becomes sacred. La Llorona no longer cried. And the most beautiful part? The child growing inside her would never hear that wail. Only stories. Stories of women who hurt, who loved, who failed, and who, in the end, forgave. But what if the ghosts that haunt us aren't spirits from the outside, but pain we inherited? Stories no one ever dared to tell? What if what you call bad luck, blockages, or unexplainable fear is really an ancestral cry for attention, for healing? The legend of La Llorona is terrifying, yes. But maybe it's also a mirror. A reflection of what happens when pain is silenced across generations. What happens when women are not believed, not heard, not held? Maybe you're carrying something that was never really yours. A family secret. A wound passed down in silence. A guilt that doesn't belong to you but you feel it anyway. So what if today was the day you faced it? To break the cycle. To ask for forgiveness. To listen to those who came before you, not just with your ears, but with your heart. Because as Isabel showed us, when someone suffers in silence for too long, even the afterlife can become a stage for unfinished stories. Now think. What have you inherited without knowing? What can you forgive even if no one ever said sorry? What if your single act of compassion could free an entire generation from the weight of silence? You don't need candles or rivers. You need courage. The kind of courage that turns horror stories into healing paths. The kind that transforms eternal cries into quiet blessings. If this story touched you, if it stirred something inside you, if you, too, carry unanswered questions about your past, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Here, we turn fear into understanding, legends into lessons, and pain into connection. Because sometimes, the only thing a spirit really wants is to be heard.